Alright, hello everyone. My name is Wesley. This is Woo Can Cook. We're doing a eggplant stir fry using some Chinese eggplant, which is pretty similar to your more standard globe eggplants. Just looks longer and thinner like this. Has fewer seeds in it and is a little bit less bitter than your more standard globe eggplants, which you'll find more commonly here in the States. Although Chinese eggplant's pretty easy to find in Chinatown because it's like very, very popular. So anywhere in Chinatown, you'll generally come across a Chinese eggplant. Today we're going to take a look at all of that and a little bit more. So if you have any questions, feel free to drop your questions in the chat. I don't know everything about eggplants, but I know lots of stuff, so hopefully I can be helpful or informative or at the very least entertaining to watch. The recipe that we're following today is loosely inspired, but pretty closely following the eggplant stir fry that comes from PF Chang's. That's a recipe hack that I had written last Friday, so a couple days ago. That popped up over on the YouTube channel, which if you're looking for that on Reddit, that's the YouTube channel at the bottom of the screen. If you're on YouTube, it's the channel you're already watching on, which is cool. You're already there. You made it. All of that and more, those are out every Friday, so those new recipes are out every Friday. And then we have the music coming out on Wednesdays, and the short recipes out every Monday. So if you're interested in all that stuff, definitely hop over and check out what's going on over there. In the PF Chang's stir fry, eggplant stir fry, they do one very specific thing because it's in the menu description, and that is that they use a little bit of sweet chili sauce, which is this stuff. You'll probably more commonly know it as the stuff that you eat with egg rolls. Usually, that's like the sweet and sour or sweet and spicy sauce that you put on the side and then dip your egg rolls in it, or your lumpias or that kind of stuff. You'll often see it in like the Lazy Susan next to the soy sauce, and maybe next to some hot sauce there'll be that sweet and sour stuff that you put on fried things. That's what that stuff is. And it has, so I believe the menu description says a sweet chili soy sauce glaze, something like that, which to my taste has always been really sweet, like excessively sweet. So we're gonna dial that back a little bit and kind of take a shot at adding a couple other things. Probably the main thing that we're adding that does not appear in the original PF hack is we're gonna add a little bit of Thai chili, which is gonna give it some nice heat. It's these Thai chili, or you might see them often referred to as bird's eye chili. I managed to find some fresh at the market today, which is gonna be really tasty. They're also really pretty when they're fresh. So we're gonna throw some of those in, and it's gonna give us a nice little bit of heat, which is gonna be a nice addition. Also something that you probably, I don't think I've ever come across Thai chili in most like Americanized Chinese cuisine. I have a feeling that's because it's too spicy and it's not super palatable, not like easily consumable to the American palate. So lots of times when I see things that call for heat, instead of using Thai chili, oftentimes I'll see things like jalapenos, or even like a serrano or a fresno. Any of those things, they're all going to be fine too. It's just a different kind of heat, and generally speaking, a little bit more mild. But if you're trying to recreate the original, I would just leave those out because they're not in the original. But I do think they're going to give us some nice little bit of heat though. Alright, so I'm kicking things off. That was 4 cloves of crushed and minced garlic, which we rough chopped. You generally won't see me fine mince the garlic, mostly because I don't find that you need to. I think that you can just smash the hell out of it and then just give it a really quick rough chop. And then generally from there, it's just going to start coming apart in the wok fry. The only time that you'll ever see me actually like go through and do a mince on the garlic is if I plan on eating it raw, and that's mostly because if you're not going to benefit from wok fry, then it's not going to come apart quite as easily, and if you're going to eat that stuff raw, then you'll probably start noticing when you have large chunks of garlic kind of floating around. But otherwise, though, generally, if we're throwing it into the wok fry, I'm not going to bother doing the fine mince. Next though, this is some ginger, which I am doing a fine mince on because it's a little bit more rough and durable as a veggie, which means that we need to actually do this fine mince. It's not going to come apart in the wok fry like that garlic is. Alright, there we go. So that's our ginger. Next up, this is going to be, let's do 3 green onions. Some of these look a little bit wilty. These are some 3 green onions which we find in Chinatown, and they are much, much larger. So I don't know why this is, but I sometimes seen these referred to as like large Korean green onions. I don't actually know why you would refer to them as Korean green onions though. But more often in like most American grocery stores, you'll see green onions that are much smaller, sort of like this. You can definitely see them side by side. The whites are much, much thinner, like so, as these compared to these larger ones where they're much thicker. I don't know why I see them referred to as like large or giant green onions, like Korean green onions, because I don't think that they're exclusively Korean in any form. But generally in Chinatown, those are the ones that you'll come across. And generally, not exclusively, but generally in American grocery stores, you'll find those smaller ones. I don't know why, but I can tell you that if you find green onions in a Chinese grocery store, it's almost certainly going to be a lot cheaper. So do yourself a favor when you're shopping for green onions, look for them in Chinatown because they're going to be a lot cheaper. I think these are 69 cents for I think it's about 4 ounces worth, or basically like half a dozen. Whereas when I find these at like American grocery stores, I think it's something like $2.50 for the same amount. Which is crazy. Same thing, but it's just different sources. So these are the whites of our green onions, which is a lot of whites. Because they're so large. I'm going to set these aside with our garlic and ginger, and these are going to get into the wok fry because they're real durable, especially because they're so large. Chef's knife is a 10-inch. Actually, it's a 12-inch, which is a little bit long, and it took me a little bit to get used to. So, to compare, I think this is an 8-inch. So I'm pretty sure this is no. Actually, I think this is a 10-inch. And then I don't know where my 8-inch is. I have an 8-inch Westhoff somewhere. But yeah, this is the 10-inch. And it's, yeah, so this one's a Père Noir, but probably more colloquially you'll recognize it as a Sabatier. It's a 12-inch, which is a little bit long, and it took me a little bit of time to get used to. And I used to like chop stuff and then bump stuff with the front of the knife because I wasn't quite conscious of like where the knife tip was pointing. But lately, though, I've been really into it, and I have been like enjoying the extra length on the knife because you can use it and sort of like navigate larger things with it a little bit more. But it definitely took me a little bit of time to get used to because I was like chopping with 8-inch, basically 8-inch Westhoff style knives, 8-inch German style knives, I should say, for a long time, for like over a decade before I picked up this knife. So it took a second to get used to. Yeah, it is. Yeah. The only downside to this knife, actually, I wouldn't really call it a downside, is that it's made out of carbon steel, which I love. I love carbon steel for a lot of reasons, mostly because I love that it like kind of just ages as you use it. The downside to that being that you can't really store carbon steel as it's wet. So I have another one. Take the roll out. I have another one that I use when I work in the kitchens. And I don't know how exactly this happened, but I just like wasn't paying attention one day, and like the tip of the knife was still wet when I put it away, so it has this a little bit of rust damage, which is like very slowly kind of coming off. But I was really, really upset when that happened. And that's the only downside to carbon steel is that you kind of have to pay attention to how you're storing it. All right, so those are the greens of our green onions. We're going to set those aside. Those are going to be our garnish later on. Next up, these are some Thai chilies. These are fresh, super fresh. I just got them at the market today, which I'm really excited for because the last batch of Thai chilies, by the way, so when they start aging, or as they like get older, the first thing that happens to your Thai chili is that it actually doesn't go bad, but it starts molding right here around the stem, which you can totally cut that off because you're not eating the stem anyway. So you can chop that off and still eat it, and it'll probably be just fine. Which I was doing for a while. Like I was doing that for like almost a whole month. I was just cutting off the molded part. But it just kind of sucks. It kind of affects the way that you can plate it. Sometimes the seeds start going a little bit faster than you'd like, and then you end up having to like pick out more of the seeds, which kind of takes away from what you can do with the Thai chili. So it also sort of detracts from the color of the Thai chili. It's how it's like this really, really vibrant yellow, yellows and oranges and reds, which I love. So usually, oh yeah, by the way, when I'm shopping for Thai chilies, I look for the most colorful ones. If you're in a really crappy grocery market, you'll probably find them and they might be like only green or only red, which kind of sucks. Mostly because they're not as pretty, but also because it kind of limits the way that they taste too. So when I look for these, I look for the most colorful ones as possible. And what we want to see when you're chopping into a Thai chili is that you want to see these nice, bright and like fresh looking colors. So the seeds, they're nice and white. Yeah, you can kind of see it. Our camera contrast is kind of blowing that out a little bit. But the seeds, they absolutely should not be like dark or dark brown in any way. Lots of times I see that, and that's generally an indication that your Thai chilies, they've been like sitting out for a while. They're a little bit old. So the first thing that should happen, the first thing that happens when they start going is not that they just start molding, which is like the case, or like wilting. A lot of veggies that just start wilting, which is easy to know when it's time to throw a veggie out, as if it starts wilting, or if it starts browning, or if it's just like looks really gross. Thai chili is generally going to be fine. It's going to look fine until you cut it open, and those seeds inside, they're going to be like, sometimes they'll even be like molding, which is not fun. So these are our Thai chilies. I just chopped up, that was, I think there was 5 of them. That's going to give us like a pretty like medium heat. I won't say mild, but it is going to give us like a pretty medium heat. It's not going to be aggressively spicy, but it's also not going to be mild either. So what I always say when other folks try and reproduce stuff that I'm cooking, especially the stuff that's in like recipes and stuff, is to dial up when you're paying attention to how spicy something is. That's generally one of the big things that you want to pay attention to is those Thai chilies. So if you don't like spicy things, dial it down. You could do like 2 or 1 or 3, 2 or 1, and that would be relatively mild. Or if you really don't like spicy stuff, leave it out entirely, and that will be okay too. Although I do recommend, if you can handle it, it's a nice flavor to it, and it's like a really, really unique quality of spice that I don't really know how else to replicate it other than throwing some Thai chili in. What type of kitchen would I work? Yeah, so I operate a catering company and a pop-up. It's also called Wesley Cook. We do a pop-up here in the Bay, in Oakland, at Federation Brewing every Friday, which is real fun. And then a couple other locations. We've also been doing some private events lately, which is really exciting. Yeah, so if you're here in the Bay Area though, come find us. We have a number of different locations now. We're at like 5 different locations right now. So, but the main one, the one that we're just kicking off this month, is going to be at Federation Brewing every Friday in Oakland, Jack London Square, which is going to be real cool. It is, by the way, it's going to be the first pop-up that we've done that has running power, which I'm super stoked for, because it means that we can do a lot of stuff that we otherwise wouldn't be able to do, like hot hold ice and stuff like that. So I'm really excited for that. Alright, so I just talked all the way through this, but right now I'm chopping up my eggplant here, which you'll notice. So if you're more familiar with like the globe style eggplants, those like the bigger, like wider and fatter eggplants that you'll see in like most American grocery stores, when you chop those open, you can kind of see it, you kind of can't see it. You can see it a little bit better on YouTube. When you chop those open, there's going to be a lot more seeds in here. That presence of more seeds causes it to be a little bit more bitter because it has a little bit more seeds going on. So to my taste, that's like the main difference that I taste when I bite into an eggplant or a globe eggplant versus when I eat a Chinese eggplant. So that it tends to be a little bit sweeter and a little bit more resistant to high heat, which I always think is part of like what makes Chinese eggplants so much more appropriate for wok fries, because they're like a little bit more resilient and they fare a little bit better in really, really high heat, which I think is great for wok stir fries like what we're about to do. Main thing though that we want to pay attention to. So by the way, if you can't get your hands on a Chinese eggplant, you can absolutely just use a regular eggplant, which I do all the time when I can't or don't have time to get to a grocery store. Or get to the Chinese markets, because you have to find these really, really fresh. So you can absolutely use a globe eggplant. But the main thing that we want to pay attention to, and this is true for any kind of eggplant really, is that an eggplant, it's very, very spongy. So you can kind of see it. Is it has this quality about it that it makes it very, very spongy, which is nice when you bite into it. It gives you this really tender bite. But the downside to that is that because it's also, for the same reason, because it's so spongy, is that it also absorbs a lot of things. So if you put it in water, it absorbs that water. If you put it in oil, it's also going to absorb that oil really, really fast. So that's the problem that I've had super, super commonly when I eat Chinese food, especially when I eat Chinese eggplant stir fries, is that if you've ever had the experience where you eat a Chinese eggplant stir fry and it's really, really oily, that's because when you fry an eggplant, it has this capacity to soak up whatever oil is in the wok. So if you say, use the normal amount of oil that you put in the wok anytime that you use it, and then you throw an eggplant, it's going to absorb that oil, and then you're going to have to add more oil to continue to cook, otherwise it's going to continue to burn. And then eventually you're going to end up throwing like 1.5 cups of oil into this eggplant, and it will have absorbed all of that oil, which makes it very, very oily. So we're going to get into how to solve that problem, which I tried a couple of different things before I figured out what would work. Yeah. Happy New Year. Yeah. Hello. Hi again. All right. So next up, we're assembling. This is going to be the sauce element to our stir fry today, which is going to be relatively simple. I think, at least to my taste, I think this one stays fairly simple. Let's go with the first two things are sort of like the required things if we're trying to make this a PF Chang hack, and I actually think that it works super well. This is 4 tablespoons of soy sauce and 2 tablespoons of sweet chili sauce. If you've ever had the PF Chang's version, it's literally in the name, sweet chili, soy glaze, something like that. So those are our required elements. And then next what we're going to do, so what's really interesting, so the whole series that we've been doing, where this video comes from, or the recipe that we wrote where it comes from, is essentially what we're doing is reproducing a lot of food that comes from Chinese, Americanized Chinese cuisine, which is why we've been doing so many PF Chang's hacks, which is really fun. And then what I've been doing is sort of like reconstructing these elements and kind of doing it through the lens of like more traditional Chinese wok cooking, and like what are the things that you might use if this was a more traditional stir fry, which I always think is really interesting because a lot of these elements, or a lot of these dishes that we're doing, especially like this one, for example, has a lot of origins in Chinese stir fries. So there are certainly like a lot of eggplant stir fries that come from Chinese cuisine that you can absolutely draw influence from, and that's essentially what we're doing here. It's doing what you would do in those stir fries. And to my taste, that has 2 specific elements to it. I forget the exact name of this dish now, but it's basically a braised eggplant. And to my taste, what that contains is oyster sauce, which is this, and spicy bean paste, or bean paste, which is like a very umami-forward sauce base, which is what we're using here. Spicy bean paste, or just bean paste, oftentimes you'll see it, is the element that you'll most commonly see used in Chinese dajiamian, which is like a Chinese noodle, like a meat sauce noodle, I guess. Think of it like a bolognese. It's a very weird bolognese. But I love using it in stir fries, and I find that it comes up in stir fries quite a bit too. Cool. What are the third and fourth ingredients? I have no idea because I wasn't paying attention. But that was 4 tablespoons of soy sauce, 1 tablespoon of sesame oil, 2 tablespoons of sweet chili sauce, and then the last 2 things. The last 2 things I used, that was oyster sauce and then black bean paste. Which, if you're looking for it, you can find the written recipe on the YouTube channel, which is over here. By the way, lots of times I forget to talk through, or lots of times I'll just sort of like talk through the things that I'm doing on the camera. So feel free, if I miss something, feel free to ask. All right, so we're giving this a quick stir. There's not really a lot to break down here, mostly I'm just sort of like separating that black bean paste. But we don't really need to whisk it super vigorously at all because it's kind of just going to come apart on its own. All right, and last up, this is going to be what you'll probably see, at least what I always say is the thing that makes like almost all Chinese food tick, at least almost all Chinese stir fries, and it's the thing that like I feel it's like the unsung hero of all stir fries, at least Chinese stir fries, and that's a little bit of cornstarch. So we're going to use, that was 2 tablespoons of cornstarch that I'm going to dilute or break down in some cold water. Cold water, don't use hot water. And this is what we're going to use to sort of like thicken our sauce element up. As we're stir frying, you'll notice that the stir fry is going to be kind of loose and liquidy, which is like a quality that I associate more often with a lot of like Thai stir fries. Lots of times I never see cornstarch slurries in Thai stir fries, so it doesn't have a thickness to it. Whereas Chinese stir fries, you'll see a lot more use of cornstarch slurry, and that's kind of going to develop that nice thick quality for us. Cool. All right. Cool. I think that is it. Let's head over to the stove. All right, so over on the stove, very often what you'll see me doing in a lot of wok stir fries is I like to start most stir fries off, not every stir fry, but most stir fries. We'll start off with, I use 4 tablespoons of peanut oil or some kind of high heat cooking oil, and that's going to give us this nice lubricated like quality to our wok fry. Today we're going to go a lot easier on that oil, probably use like maybe a tablespoon at a time or so. And the reason for that, I mentioned this earlier too, the reason for that is because our eggplant is going to be very spongy and absorptive. Which means that if we were to use all 4 of that tablespoons of oil in that initial wok fry, the eggplant would absorb all of that oil pretty quickly, probably within like the first like 30 seconds or so, which is definitely not long enough to cook an eggplant. So what we're going to do is we're going to add that oil very, very gradually. So every like maybe 45 seconds or so, we're going to add a little bit more oil. And that's going to help us keep that wok nice and lubricated, which number 1 is very important because it's going to make sure that we don't burn the eggplant. If there's not enough oil in the wok, then it will absolutely burn. But number 2, we also don't want to add too much oil to the wok or else it will over-absorb all of that oil, and then we'll have a very, very oily, disgusting mess, which is not attractive. Yeah. All right. Hello to everyone just tuning in. My name is Wesley. This is Wu Can Cook. If this is your first time catching one of these streams, we're here every Tuesday at 6:30 PST with new recipes on my YouTube channel every Friday. So last Friday we came out with a recipe hack for the PF Chang's Eggplant Stirfry, which iconically relies on the use of sweet chili sauce and soy sauce. Today we're about to run through how I like to approach the wok frying of an eggplant, which is the main challenge behind that is addressing the fact that eggplants have a quality about it that love to absorb oil really, really quickly, which is why lots of times the reason that people don't like eggplant stir fries is because they're really, really oily because they've absorbed all of that cooking oil. So I'm going to kind of take a look at how to avoid that, at least a little bit. It's going to be a little oily, that's the whole point, I guess. So if you have any questions, feel free to drop your questions in the chat. And as always, if you haven't yet, definitely make your way over to the YouTube channel. Check out those recipes. We have a whole bunch of stuff coming up. This one is part of a large series that we've been doing for like a whole year now that's dedicated to reconstructing a lot of food from Chinese American cuisine, which I love doing because Chinese American cuisine is really fascinating to me. And lots of times there's a lot of dishes that come from Chinese American cuisine that I've never eaten before. Like honey sesame chicken. I'd never had that before until I tried it, until I made it, which was really interesting. All right, so here's our, I think this is actually grapeseed oil. We're adding, that's maybe like a single tablespoon. And then here's our long yao. And then here's our eggplant. All right, so you'll notice already, yeah, pretty much already, the eggplant has absorbed that oil already, which is kind of the point. That's kind of what we're going for here. So super gradually, we're gonna just continue to add a little bit of oil at a time. And basically our goal is to, number one, make sure that that wok is lubricated so we don't run out of oil. If there's not enough oil in the wok, it will start burning. But number two, make sure you don't over oil the wok. These, by the way, so this is bound to happen to you eventually, but if you have these little pieces of eggplant, stuff like this, that's true for like chicken and stuff like that, you probably want to pick that out. If you for whatever reason, if you have small flakes of stuff that you've chopped, I mentioned this anytime that we're chopping, but the big goal behind anytime that you're chopping anything really is that you want to get an even chop. You want things to be evenly sized. Because if they're unevenly sized, the stuff that's smaller is going to burn, or the stuff that's larger is going to undercook, which is not what we're after in either case. So I generally say, if you find that there's like errant pieces of things that are different sized, which shouldn't happen if you chopped it correctly, that shouldn't happen, but shit happens. And if it does happen to you, just pick that out. Don't try and cook it because it's just going to burn. So at this point, I think we've added maybe like maybe 1.5 tablespoons of oil or so over the course of like maybe 3 times now. Yeah. Color is beautiful. Yeah, I thought that's one of the things that I love about an eggplant stir fry, is that it has these really vibrant colors to it. Partially because the eggplants are really gorgeous. If you get it right. If you don't get it right, a spoiled eggplant is like brownish, like purplish brown, which is not good. And I've cooked some like spoiled eggplants, or like overly ripe, or at the very least like on the cusp of about to go. But if you get your hands on a good looking eggplant, it should be like vibrantly purple. Like really gorgeous purple, which to me is one of my favorite aspects of an eggplant stir fry, because it's so gorgeous. And also the same reason why I love looking for Thai chilies that have lots of like nice pops of color. So not just red or not just green, but we want like lots of greens, yellows, oranges. That's also going to give us. That means that, by the way, the Thai chili is at like varying stages of ripeness, which means that you're going to get varying stages of heat and flavor, which is good. We want that. All right. So we're about, I'd say that's about halfway there. We're going to continue to cook that. That will go for maybe another 2 or 3 minutes. And that's going to give us this nice thoroughly cooked eggplant. So by the way, undercooked eggplant is maybe one of the worst things that you'll ever bite into, because it's like really chewy. Kind of tastes like overcooked chicken, which is never attractive. So the other thing that we want to make sure is that we don't undercook the eggplant either. So I'd say at this point we've maybe added, like, we're at about 2 tablespoons of oil or so, just very gradually adding a little bit more oil at a time. I'd say like I'm probably adding like maybe a teaspoon of oil at a time, maybe a little bit less than that. And that's essentially helping us make sure that we don't let that eggplant absorb too much oil. Yeah. I think that's nearly there. This, by the way, what we're doing right now is a great example of what a batch cook looks like. So lots of people ask me how to work around the fact that your wok is never going to be quite as hot as it is when you're working in a wok burner, which is sort of like the wok burner. To me, like as far as I can tell, a wok burner gets about as hot as a commercial gas range does. They're relatively close. So if you're cooking in a restaurant, when we use the commercial gas ranges at least, they go about as hot, maybe a little bit less hot than where our wok burners go. So one of the main challenges behind wok cooking at home is that you're never going to have quite as much heat as you would if you were cooking in number one a wok burner or number two in a restaurant. If you were cooking in a restaurant, you might achieve the same amount of heat. So what I love doing in this particular recipe, and also a lot of other recipes, generally the ones that contain a lot of ingredients, is par cooking stuff. So what we're doing right now is we're par cooking our eggplant, and then we're going to pull this out when it's done cooking, maybe in another minute or so. And that's going to help us make sure that our eggplant gets this nice high heat cook, which is what we're doing right now. But once we pull it out, we're going to go on and remove it and then finish up with our remaining ingredients, which is mostly veggies and aromatics, I'd say. And that's going to help us make sure that we can cook those other ingredients also on high heat, and then we're going to add that eggplant back at the very end. So if I was cooking in a wok burner on wok heat, or even on a commercial range, I might not have to do this. Or otherwise we'd be able to just sort of push stuff to one side like this. You'll see a lot of wok chefs do that. And then just sort of use the other side of the wok to cook our remaining veggies. You probably don't want to do this in this particular recipe. Sometimes I do that if I'm cooking a very, very small amount of things. So if the recipe doesn't call for very many ingredients anyway, I might do that. But in our case, particularly today, because we're cooking a really large amount of eggplant, I do think that batch cook is going to be very useful. Yeah, not quite there. Ooh, that is really good though. So we're nearly there. I'd say we want another, maybe another minute, maybe another 30 seconds or so actually. And then we're going to let the remainder of that rigidity cook off, and make sure that we don't have undercooked eggplant. So, because that's maybe not the greatest, most even chop. Here we are. That's by the way, one of the biggest challenges with chopping an eggplant is because they grow in weird and oblong shapes. Is that parts of it are going to be a little bit smaller or more tapered off at certain points than others. So you'll notice these smaller bits like that, this stuff. Is cooking. That stuff is going to cook a lot faster than our larger bits, like this, for example. This is a much larger piece of eggplant, and then we're going to have uneven cook. So we generally want to try and avoid that from happening, but shit happens. All right, looks like it's there. So I'm pulling my eggplant out, and then we're going to do our second half of our wok fry. First thing that we want to do, anytime that we're batch cooking, by the way, if there's debris in the wok, definitely take that remaining debris out. If there's stuff left behind that probably is just going to burn. But the other very important element that we want to do in a batch cook is let the wok reheat before you continue to cook. That's the whole point of the batch cook, and I see lots of people do that in a lot of batch cooks. That's kind of defeats the whole point. So the whole point is what we're doing is we're removing stuff, and then we're going to let that wok reheat. So you see all that nice smoke coming off. That's what we're looking for. We want all of this smoke kind of billowing off of our wok. That's generally a sign that the wok is nice and hot and ready to cook on. If you don't see this happening, it's probably not hot enough. So here's our remaining, that's a full 4 tablespoons of oil going in now. And we're going to do our veggies. So here's our ginger, garlic, and finally here's the whites of our green onions, a lot of whites. Really big green onions today. So we're going to give that, I usually like to say about 15 seconds, but what we're really looking for here is we're using our nose, we're smelling stuff. When you start smelling garlic and ginger, that's when you know you're in a good spot. but generally speaking, about 10-15 seconds. All right, next up, here's our Thai chilies going in. Thai chilies, by the way, as the name implies, they're chilies. So they're going to kick up a lot of capsaicin, especially because we've kept these seeds in. So when those are going in, make sure your windows are open, or you're basically breathing in pepper spray, which is not fun. All right. Those are Thai chilies, all right. Here's our eggplant going back in, and finally here's our sauce. Anytime that I'm doing sauces that contain really concentrated ingredients like oyster sauce or black bean paste, I like to cut it with a little bit of water. In a lot of recipes, you'll see recipes call for chicken stock or vegetable stock at this point. You can absolutely do that. I sometimes will do that too. Most of the time what I usually end up doing is just using the same bowl that the sauce was in and kind of like use a little bit of water to wash off the residual sauce that gets left behind. And that's what I just did here. And that tends to do it for me. But if you're trying to stick to like what's like really close to what restaurants would be doing, chicken stock. That's generally what that will be. All right, last up, here's our cornstarch slurry. I like to add this a little bit at a time, so that was like maybe a tablespoon or two. And what we want to do, especially, this is also really important, when you add cornstarch slurry, that should go directly in the center. We don't want to go around the sides like we've been doing with our cooking oil, because cornstarch, if it hits the wok heat, if it gets to like the edges of your wok heat, that's going to start cooking the cornstarch, which is not fun. And then it's basically you're going to get like fried cornstarch on the edges of your wok, which is not what we're after here. And the other thing that I always say when we're using cornstarch slurry, you notice that I didn't dump the whole thing in, because most of the time when I use cornstarch slurry, or not most of the time, but a lot of the time, I don't end up using all of the cornstarch. So that was, I think I used maybe like 3/4 of that slurry. And we're actually already there. This is also like already a nice thick and luxurious sauce. If we had used all of it, you probably have that probably would have gotten too thick, and that would have been a hot mess. So once again, when we're using cornstarch slurry, don't just go and dump that straight into the wok, because it will absolutely over thicken the sauce base if you're not careful. And then finally, the last thing that we want to do anytime that we're cooking in carbon steel, really, but especially carbon steel woks like this one, do yourself a favor, clean this thing while it's hot. What I like to do is just give it a quick rinse, and that should generally do it. Sometimes if I absolutely have to, if there's, say, maybe a lot of oil on it, or if there's a lot of burnt stuff on it, I might have to scrub it. But generally speaking, if you've got a good patina on your carbon steel, it should mostly just come right off, like so. And then basically what I'm doing is throwing it back on heat for a quick second, and then letting some of that moisture burn off. And that's just going to make sure that our wok is nice and dry. So we don't want residual moisture, for the same reason that we don't want residual moisture on that knife that I showed you guys a couple minutes ago. Is that if you have residual moisture left behind on carbon steel, it basically just starts rusting, which is the worst possible thing that you can do with carbon steel. All right. Whoops. There's no camera there. How did I make the sauces? Yeah, that's we assembled the sauce a little bit earlier in the stream. It's a combination of soy sauce, sesame oil, sweet chili sauce, a little bit of Shaoxing wine, and then some black bean paste and oyster sauce. So if you're looking for it, I linked it a little bit earlier, but I'll link it again. There's the written recipe, and you can find all that stuff over there, which tends to be really useful, especially for folks who are trying to reproduce this one, which I love. By the way, if you do attempt any of the recipes, there's a subreddit that lots of folks use. It's our Wu Can Cook if you're on Reddit. And lots of people post there, like when they try it and they take pictures, if you remember to take a photo. It's really fun to see what other people, when they attempt it, what it looks like. So, I enjoy that. That's mostly just for me, I guess. For my enjoyment. All right. I'm finishing off with our greens. I'm finishing this off with the greens of my green onions, and that is it. What is the subreddit? Yeah, r/Wu-Can-Cook. Does that work? I think that will link it in Reddit. Yeah, it does. Nice. Yeah, but yeah, if you do take a shot at any of the recipes, if you don't mind, please post pictures. I love seeing the photos. They're really fun. Especially, but if you attempted the recipe and you maybe didn't have one or two things, or if you had to move stuff around, or if you tried something slightly different, or if you had to adjust the recipe in certain ways. I love seeing when people do that. So I know lots of folks, for example, can't find fresh chow fun, especially if you're not near a Chinatown neighborhood, or if you don't live in California, basically. That definitely can get hard to find. So I've seen some really great videos, or really great photos of folks who either tried to make their own chow fun, which is really cool, or just tried to make other noodles that are similar to chow fun, or used other noodles that are similar to chow fun. That's really fun. So yeah. Ooh, a private cooking show on the muesli. That would be interesting. Yeah. I don't know who would come to that, but it would be fun. Yeah, we were thinking about doing in-person cooking classes in the commercial kitchen. I don't know exactly what the permitting is required. The health inspector said that we could do it, and it wouldn't technically violate any health inspection laws. But I don't think that he necessarily knows about the safety requirements that go behind having people in a commercial kitchen. So if the commercial kitchen lets us have guests in the kitchen itself, we might attempt that, especially during the off season. So maybe next winter or so, we might try and do some in-person classes when the pop-up is not too busy, and be a good use of our extra time. Yeah, 3:15 a.m. Yeah. What could you add instead of eggplant? Oh yeah. I would say if you can't get your hands on eggplant, I would say you could do it with any kind of resilient veggie. So the first thing that comes to mind, it's going to be a different dish at that point. It's literally in the name. So if you can't get an eggplant, it's going to be a completely different stir fry. But if that's okay though, if you can't get an eggplant, the first thing that comes to my mind, for example, would be a really resilient veggie like broccoli. That to me would probably be the closest thing, because it withstands wok heat really, really well, and it would have a lot of starch and fiber to it, and kind of reproduce something relatively similar. Or you might even do it with tofu. That would work really well. This dish, I believe in Chinese, the dish that I was referring to when I was drawing some inspiration for how I wanted to adjust to PF Chang's recipe, it's called hongqi Chao something like that. Hongqi something. I can't remember exactly. I should remember. But what that dish reminds me of a lot of is another tofu dish, which is called hongsao tofu, which looks very similar. It's also like a kind of like a dark soy sauce braised sort of thing. And it's basically doing the same thing, but we're using firm tofu in that recipe. So to my mind, that's what I would go for first, is either like things like firm tofu or like a really resilient veggie, so like broccoli or bell peppers, carrots, stuff like that might work really well too. Have I heard of Amusely? I'm pretty sure I have. It's like amuse.ly, I think. Maybe. I'm pretty sure I have. Yeah, I suppose it won't be an eggplant stir fry. Yeah, definitely it wouldn't be an eggplant stir fry, that's for sure. But that doesn't mean that it's not good. And that's sort of like the whole ethos behind what a stir fry is that you're basically cook what don't blindly follow a recipe, and that's especially true with things that are seasonal. So eggplant, generally you can get an eggplant anytime in the season, but there are other things that you absolutely cannot get year round. Like for example, tomatoes, which are very difficult to locate. But that's generally the ethos behind stir fries, is that like use what's fresh. Don't just use an eggplant because it says it in the name. Use it if it looks fresh, you could do it. But if it doesn't look fresh or you can't find one, substitute it. Do it with something else, and it will probably still be good. That's kind of the whole point of a stir fry, right? So yeah, that very often if I can't find a bell pepper, I'll substitute that with my favorite substitute for things like bell pepper is like a celery stick, or like onions. Onions also really great substitute. Carrots also really useful. Mostly things that I like always have on hand, like onions and carrots. Sometimes broccoli, that's always on hand. All of those things are going to be really, really useful, and help you like basically still make dinner even if you don't have all of the ingredients. Alright. These are, by the way, one of my favorite sets of chopsticks that I absolutely cannot use. By the way, if you're not familiar with chopsticks, Chinese chopsticks will always have ridges here. And that just sort of like helps you pick stuff up because the ridges just help sort of like grip stuff. And these chopsticks, they're really pretty. They have these really nice designs here, which is why you'll see them in a lot of the photos. But they're really, really hard to use because they're completely smooth here. Which makes it very difficult to pick stuff up. So they look really pretty, but mostly just for sitting on the bowl like this. Later I'm going to use a fork, I think. So. Alright, thanks everyone for tuning in. My name is Wesley, this is Wu Can Cook. If this is your first time catching one of these streams, we're here every Tuesday at 6:30 PST with the new recipes. Those are out every Friday over on the YouTube channel. I think usually those are coming out at noon. Unless I forget, sometimes they're really late. One time I had to redo an edit because there was like a big gap in the video that came out at like 8 o'clock at night or something. But those are usually out at noon on Fridays. And the short recipes, especially the ones that if you like following me from gift recipes, those are always out on the YouTube channel every Monday. Every Monday. And then the beats that are behind those gift recipes, there's a full version of those all the remixes. Those are out every Wednesday. So lots of new content are coming out on the YouTube channel every week, so that's really fun. So cool. If you're here in the Bay Area, our first pop-up at Federation Brewing is going to start next Friday. So not this Friday, but next Friday at Federation Brewing in Oakland, nearby Jack London Square. Come find us. We're here. We're going to be there basically for the entire time that they're open. I think like 3 to 10, 3 to close or something like that. So come find us if you're here in the Bay Area, and we're going to be there every Friday. Cool. All right. Thanks everyone. I'll see you soon.
Tastes like strawberries on a summer evening, and it sounds just like a song. I want more berries and that summer feeling. It's so wonderful and warm. Breathe me in, breathe me out. I don't know if I could ever go without. I'm just thinking out loud. I don't know if I could ever go without watermelon sugar high, watermelon sugar high, watermelon sugar high, watermelon sugar high, watermelon sugar. Strawberries on a summer evening, baby. we are the end of June. I want your belly and that summer feeling, getting washed away in you. Breathe me in, breathe me out. I don't know if I could ever go without watermelon sugar high, 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 watermelon sugar high. I just wanna taste ya, I just wanna taste ya, watermelon sugar high.
It bothers me and I'm feeling unhappy. I just try and think of nice things. What rhyme with it? Well, let me see. Nice things. Daffodils. Green meadows. Raindrops on roses. Whiskers on kittens. Cream-colored ponies and crisp apple strudels. Doorbells and sleigh bells and schnitzel with noodles. Wild geese that fly with the moon on their wings. These are a few of my favorite things. Girls in white dresses with blue satin sashes. Snowflakes that stay on my nose and eyelashes. Silver white winters that melt into springs. These are a few of my favorite things. When the dog bites, when the bee stings, when I'm feeling sad, I simply remember my favorite things, and then I don't feel so bad.
Well, good for you, I guess you moved on really easily. You found a new girl and it only took a couple weeks. Remember when you said that you wanted to give me the world? And good for you, I guess that you've been working on yourself. I guess the therapist I found for you, she really helped. Now you can be a better man for your brand new girl. Well, good for you, you look happy and healthy.
smile.